So you got diagnosed with ALS, what, 8 years ago? Is that right?
Yeah, I was, yes, I was diagnosed in March 23rd of 2017. So I had been having issues, and I guess maybe we got to go back just a little bit. So
Okay.
um, I'm retired military at the time, and I retired from the military in 2012. At the time that I started having health issues, I was living in, we'll just say I was living overseas, flying for another company. And I started having some health issues, leg weakness, hand weakness. Um, and I was starting to have a little bit of, I noticed some swallowing issues. And so I went to the doctor and anyway, did an exam and found that I was extremely hyper reflexive. He, did the little reflex on my knees and my legs shot straight out and his eyes got as big as saucers. And he looked at me and he said, "Did you do that?" And I said, "You mean on purpose?" And I said, "No." And then he hit the other leg and the other leg shot straight out. And he goes, "That's not normal." And he said, "That's a neurological issue. And you need to see a neurologist." And so, um, anyway, I was still flying, and went and saw the neurologist a couple weeks later, and he took a look at me, and we talked about a number of things. And then he did an exam as well, and after we got done with the exam, he looked at me and well, one of the other things he found was that my tongue was fasciculating. Um, and he sat down with me and after the exam and he goes, "Look, I would never tell somebody this on their first visit, but," he goes, "you're very knowledgeable on what's going on with your body and all this stuff, so I'm going to just be straight with you." And he said, "I think you have a motor neuron issue, and I think it's ALS." And and I said, "Okay." And from then on, we started seeing a bunch of doctors, and that was in I saw him in March of 2016. And then it was a little over a year later, the end of March 2017, when I got my diagnosis. And I got my diagnosis at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Anyway, uh, after that, um, I kind of stopped seeing doctors. I'd seen so many doctors and so many things. I just kind of said, "We're going to let this do its thing." And my wife and I talked, and we made a decision that, we're just going to let it take its course and do what it does. And when it's my time, it's my time. And but over the years, the ALS has kind of gone up and down. And just as the doctor said, it was gonna, you'd have good days, bad days. Um, it would get bad. It might get a slight better, and then it'd go downhill again. And it we noticed that for probably the first couple of years. And then a friend of mine that was a doctor down in Florida, he helped me with some medication, put me on uh, a combination of Cymbalta and duloxetine, or I'm sorry, Cymbalta and gabapentin, that he had found that he could help diabetics get feeling back in their feet by mixing the two of them. And anyway, he said, "I want to try it on you," and he did. And so that helped me for a number of years. But then I didn't like the way it was making me feel, and I just wanted to be off medication, and so I stopped taking it after 3 years. And um, and then I started going downhill last year, would have been 2024, and especially last winter. I started going downhill and started having lots of breathing issues. Um, it would happen during the day, but the worst was at night, where I would find that my breathing in the middle of the night, I'd wake up 5, 10 times a night, it seemed like, in a complete panic, as though I was drowning, as if my diaphragm had just stopped and wasn't moving my lungs anymore. And at times I'd have to force myself to exhale before I could inhale. Um, and it just got really bad. And so last March, went and saw, uh, went to my doctor's office and talked with the nurse. Um, and we talked about uh, possibly having to go on some sort of breathing assistance, like a non-invasive ventilator, or do a sleep study and maybe go on a CPAP or something. And anyway, we talked about all that, and in the meantime, she said, "Let's do a sleep study or a night oxygen test." And so I brought a meter home and slept with it, and they found that I was spending about after the test, it said I spent 90% of the night with my oxygen levels at 89 or below, and that I had had 25 episodes in that 6.5 hour period of my oxygen at 88 and below. And I'd had 2 episodes where it was 84 and below for the entire time of the episode. And the longest period of time that I'd gone, I had one of those was 13 consecutive minutes. And so that's when the nurse said, I think you need to go talk to an ALS clinic. And we set up an appointment for May for me to go to an ALS clinic um, over in Denver. And so anyway, uh, in the meantime, um, while all this was going on, my wife had been doing some research on DMSO. And it actually was in January January of this year, 2025, that I started using some DMSO. But I, I read a book on it. I read some papers on it and did some stuff. And my wife read some things, and, we learned how to use it, but we had no idea in reality how much to use, or really how we should be using it. And so I was using it, a couple times a week. I'd put a little bit on a cotton ball and dab it on, we'd put it on my spine and on my back. And I'll get into that here in just a second. But turns out that I just wasn't using enough. And so during the first few months of the year, I started thinking about the DMSO, studying it a little bit, about the properties of the molecule and how it binds to everything, how it will enter into your bloodstream, how it bypasses the blood-brain barrier. Um, and Anyway, I started looking into different things, and in I was also last fall I had been reading some studies on ALS. There was a gentleman that put together a bunch of studies. He'd gone through the summaries of about 9,800 different ALS studies, and some of those had to do with spinal issues. And I found that very fascinating due to my time in the military, and the back issues that I have from being in the military, and um, and also understanding who is more likely to get ALS, according to a number of studies that show that um, military members and uh, professional athletes have a 60% higher risk of ALS than other people. I started thinking, why is that? And then talking to other people, I started thinking, well, it seems like a lot of people, and athletes, military members have spinal issues, and not necessarily huge spine injuries, but just, back issues, back problem, back pain, whatever it be. And one of the studies that I had read said that spinal issues, that you have, spinal injuries, can change the actual chemical makeup of the spinal fluid. And I thought, well, that's going directly into the brain. So I thought, well, let's try putting the DMSO on my spine. Let's see if my spinal issues could have something to do with this. So we started putting it on my spine, but but we were using the cotton ball, putting the cotton ball over the end of the bottle and just putting a little bit on there. And then in April of after I'd done that night oxygen test, one of the things that I'd read was that the veterinarian world uses DMSO a great deal. After reading about it and all the properties, especially the anti-inflammatory and pain relieving properties, I thought, well, I wonder if I could put it into my system better by putting it in, through an IV. So I talked to my vet friend, and I said, hey, um, do you ever use DMSO intravenously on an animal? And she said, yes, I do. And I said, well, when would you do that? And she said, well, if I had an animal that was down and couldn't get up, and it had a severe neurological problem. And I stopped her right there and I go, severe neurological problem and can't get up. I said, that sounds an awful lot like ALS. And she says, yeah, it kind of does. I said, well, so you give it intravenously. I said, does it work? And she goes, yeah, many times it does. Many times I can get the horse up on its feet, or the animal, I can get it on its feet and start working with it and start treating it. And I said, well, that's amazing. I said, so we're using that for a severe neurological problem on an animal that can't get up, but we're not doing this for humans. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, do you know of anything out there that would do, IV DMSO for humans? And she said, no, I don't. And she said, the only thing I could get would be animal grade. And I said, well, I don't know that I could get anybody to give me animal grade DMSO through an IV. And she said, yeah, I doubt you could do that. And we talked a little bit more about how she applies it even topically to animals. And I thought, maybe I'm not using enough. And so I changed the way I was putting on the DMSO, and I stopped using a cotton ball, and I started putting the DMSO in my hand and then putting it everywhere I could reach on my spine, down the back of my neck, and across the back of my shoulders, my lower back, and then all up and down the spine as far as I could reach. And so I probably increased the amount that I was putting on by 10, 15 times what I had been putting on with a cotton ball. And the thing that I found that was amazing was that within 3 days of doing that, and so I started that on the 6th of April of 2025 of this year. By the 9th of April, those episodes of waking up like I was drowning completely stopped. I started sleeping better. I started feeling better. I started getting strength back in my arms. Just a whole boatload of things started to improve, to the point that at the end of April, and I was building a new barn, and I had hired some guys to help me frame it, and we were putting up the trusses, and we had a crane over that day to help put the trusses up, and I was working the tag line, but where I'd had the company drop the trusses on the side of the road, it was just about 10 feet too far for what the crane could reach from where the crane was sitting in front of my barn. I actually was able to pull the trusses across the road, so 30 feet across the road to where the crane could pick them up. And each of those trusses weighed 340 pounds. And I told my wife that night, I'm like, I can't believe it's the first time in years that I felt my muscles work correctly in my arms. And so I'd been on this DMSO like this for about 3.5 weeks. And I was just like, it was amazing what it was doing. And I've been, very, very athletic, very strong my whole life. And so I think that's been a help, but I know that this DMSO has been helping. And so in, uh, in the first week of May of this year, I did another night oxygen test because the second week of May, I had my appointment to go to the ALS clinic in Denver. I did the DMSO, or the night oxygen test again in the first week of May because I wanted to take the results. I was feeling so much better. I wanted to take the results to the doctors at the ALS clinic. The results I thought were tremendous. It showed that I had gone from spending 90% of the night with my oxygen levels at 89 or below to only 42% of the night. And my longest episode had gone from 13 minutes down to 4 minutes, and the number of episodes had greatly decreased. I can't remember the number, but I just remember that it had greatly decreased. And I was like, this is amazing. And the nurse she was absolutely just floored. She was like, I can't believe you in 3 weeks you've had that much success. And so anyway, I took the results to the ALS clinic in May, and needless to say, the doctors weren't very impressed. And they did an endurance test, they did some strength tests, and they go, hey, you're testing off the charts for what an ALS patient should be testing like. And so I said, well, okay. And I said, so I told them about the DMSO and what I'd been doing, and they basically told me, they said, well, there's no data in that, and we can't, you know, we don't. Basically, the doctor said, I don't know anything about that, and so I can't, uh, tell you that you should be doing that or not doing it. And she said, and I don't think it has anything to do with with the way you're feeling now. She goes, and then she basically said to me, she goes, I think, maybe you've been misdiagnosed. And I kind of laughed, and I just said, are you kidding me? I said, you just examined me. I said, was I hyper reflexive? And she goes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I said, so that's an upper motor neuron issue, isn't it? And she goes, yeah, absolutely. That's an upper motor neuron issue. I go, um, did you looked in my mouth? I said, was my tongue fasciculating? And she said, yeah, absolutely. And she goes, I've been sitting here watching you. Your arms are fasciculating. I've been watching them fasciculate. And I said, well, isn't that a lower motor neuron issue? And she said, yeah, it is. And I said, well, isn't the definition of ALS an upper and a lower motor neuron issue? And don't know how it got there, don't know how to solve it, don't know. And she said, well, technically, yes. Um, that is the definition of ALS. And I said, well, um, I said, well, how can you then say that I've been misdiagnosed because I'm doing better than you think I ought to be doing, or because something I'm doing is helping me? And she said, well, she said, I don't know. She goes, I can't believe that that's helping. And so, she goes, that's not what we would look at. And I was just kind of floored. I just was like, I can't believe you're going to I'm doing something that's helping, but you're dismissing it and going to the point of saying, well, you've probably been misdiagnosed. And I said, but you didn't see me, 2 months ago. You haven't seen me over the last number of years, and you haven't seen what I've been doing and what I've gone through, and what I used to be like. And it was funny. I came back and I sat down with the nurse after I went to the nurse here in town at the clinic, at the VA clinic here. And I told her what the doctor had said, and she was floored. And I said, you saw me in March when we did the first night oxygen test. You saw me all winter. I've been in and out. You've seen me. And she said, yeah, absolutely. She goes, I know exactly what you were like. And she goes, you are doing, tons better than you were last March. And I said, but this is what the doctor said. And she was like, really? That's what the doctor said? I said, maybe I'd have the doctor talk to you and you can explain, because she doesn't want to believe me. But uh, anyway, so that's kind of where we're at. So now, I went through the summer. I didn't think I was going to be able to hay and ranch and do the things that I do, and take care of my animals. Last winter, I thought I was actually on the way downhill. In fact, we actually ordered a wheelchair. Things were getting that bad. It is still in the box, though, I will say. I ended up being able to hay, um, take care of my animals. I rode horses this summer. I even got bucked off a horse. I was training one of my colts, and some four-wheelers come up behind us, and I was riding him along the road out in front of the house, and they spooked him, and he went to bucking, and I don't have the leg strength that I used to have, and off I went. But still, I mean, an ALS patient normally wouldn't be doing that. Um, I went for a 3-hour horse ride up here behind the house, up on the hills. Um, just amazing. And I, I I've been doing things that I shouldn't be able to do, and I never thought that I was going to be able to do again after last winter. But now back to the DMSO. So I've been using it nonstop. I've been using it 5 to 6 days a week. Been trying to follow some of the recommendations in the books and stuff. They talk about, doing it, if you're doing it every day, use it for 5 days and then take 2 days off. What I found though was what I was doing was I was using it weekdays, Monday through Friday, and then taking Saturday and Sunday off. But what I ended up finding out this summer was that my Mondays were a little bit more difficult than the rest of the days, having been off of it for 2 days. And so I started using it 6 days a week and just taking Sunday off. And then in October, at the end of October, I decided I wanted to do a little test. I wanted to see if the DMSO was really doing what I thought it was doing, because I've had people, the doctors basically saying, well, that's not helping you and it's not doing anything for you. And anyhow, so what I did was I stopped using the DMSO on the 31st of October, on Halloween Day. So the last day I used it was the 30th of October. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. And as the next few days progressed on, I felt symptoms that I hadn't felt since last winter, last March, early spring timeframe. I hadn't felt some of those symptoms. The weakness in the legs and the arms started coming back. I noticed my endurance was dropping off. Um, I had I had no energy. Um, I was out trying to drag a small pasture with my four-wheeler and a drag behind it to to break down the horse manure, and just turning the wheel of the four-wheeler wore my arms out to the point where I had to stop and let them rest. Um, and and then I was working on the new barn and putting in some bolts, and I was just using a ratchet trying to put the bolts in, and my arms were just like, oh, I'm done. And I could only work for a short period of time throughout the day, and the rest of the day I just spent on the couch or in the chair. Was out of energy. My breathing, after about day 5, I started to have issues with my breathing again. About day 5 or 6, my wife, she came up and asked me, and she said, Todd, it doesn't seem like the DMSO is working. And she goes, you're not doing well. I don't understand what happened. And I just said, well, I don't know. And because I couldn't tell her. And then uh, on the 9th, it was Sunday, the 9th of November. So this has been 10 days I'd been off the DMSO. I'd gone to church that day and come home, and I was just, after church, I came home and I was just wiped out. It was all I could do. It took all the energy I had to go to church that day. And I came home and I sat down in the chair, and my wife was sitting on the couch across from me. And she's like, Todd, this DMSO is not working anymore. It's not, what's going on? You're going downhill, and you're just not doing well. And then I finally told her, I said, well, I haven't used DMSO since the 30th of October. It's been 10 days. And the breathing, I was starting to have, I could feel the breathing issues, like the panic of the sleep issue, the drowning issues were starting to come back. And anyway, my wife, she wasn't happy with me when she found out that I had stopped using the DMSO. But I told her, hey, I'm going to start tomorrow, and we're going to start using it again. I'm taking notes. I told her, I said, I needed you to see me with a completely unbiased, not knowing what was going on, and be able to just tell me what you think. and you know, throughout the week telling me, "Hey, you're not doing well. This is not what's happening," and just all your comments and stuff was really eye-opening for me. Um, and it and so I took a bunch of notes on what had happened and the different days, different symptoms that were coming back and how I was doing. And then after I started the DMSO on Monday the 11th, or I guess it was Monday. I'm sorry, Monday the 10th of November. Um, it took about 24 hours, and within that first 24 hours after using the DMSO, I was amazed at how much better I was feeling. Um, and then over the next week, things just kept getting better and better and better. I will say this: there are a couple of things with some of the strength issues and things that have not fully returned. You know, it's been a month; they haven't fully returned. I'm hoping they will. Um, but I think I, I can honestly say now that the DMSO, I know for a fact, after having done that little experiment myself, that the DMSO is doing something. What it's doing and what it's fixing, I don't know, but it is helping a great deal in my overall quality of life as someone with ALS, and it's been amazing. And even people at church, people in town, friends, they're like, "Todd, you're doing so well. You're doing so much better." And I get that comment all the time. They're like, they're like, "I wouldn't even know you have ALS right now." And so I've been totally amazed. Now, I'm going to say this. I got to put this caveat out there. This is what it's doing for me. I have no idea what it'll do for others. Um, and I don't know any other ALS patient that is using it, um, or using it the way that I am. I will say this: I did go see a doctor. I found out that there are a handful of doctors in the United States that will do DMSO intravenously. They mostly use it for cancer patients because the DMSO will bind to everything that it touches. They're using it for cancer patients on a 15-day treatment where they're using the DMSO to bind to the cancer treatment, the medication, and then using that DMSO as the host to get it into all the cells of the body and transport it throughout the body. And so I know that a 15-day treatment, because they're doing that, will work. And so I'd gone and I found a doctor that is not actually too far from here. I actually had my first visit with her um, about a week and a half ago. We are going to start IV DMSO treatments on Monday, the 8th of December. And we're going to do one treatment um, every Monday through the rest of December. So I'll get 4 treatments in December, and we're going to see what happens. I'm actually going to stop tomorrow. I'm going to stop taking the DMSO topically as I've been doing, like I normally do. I'll use it tomorrow, Saturday, but then I won't use it again while I am doing the IV treatments. And so starting Monday, the 8th, here in a couple days, we'll go and get an IV treatment, and we're going to see what happens and see how I feel. See if I need to do it more often than once a week. Um, I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to take some notes and we're going to try and figure this out and see if we can maybe find something that will help more people in my situation have a better quality of life. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I had an email from a young lady whose boyfriend has ALS, and she's been asking me about it, and I didn't wanna say anything to her until I had a chance to really talk to you again. Um, I'll see if it's okay with you, I may direct her your direct I'll send you her email address, and then you can choose if you wanna talk to her or not.
That's
Um,
fine. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
but it sounds like they are at that point where they want to figure something out because
Right.
they I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it with my own life, with other kinds of health issues, and my next door neighbor, Dan, with his COPD, the pulmonologist was so flippant with him the first time he went there with his improved nebulizing with the DMSO. He and I both thought that he would just have to go find another pulmonologist because the guy was so flippant with him. The second visit we went in, I guess the pulmonologist decided to pay attention. And like you with your VA nurse saying, "Yes, I can see these changes." Dan's regular MD in town was like that with his COPD. She's like, "Whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep on going with it. I'm so thrilled." But the specialist goes, "Yeah, whatever. This is yeah, I don't believe you." But the second time he went to that pulmonologist, and the pulmonologist did admit hesitantly that something was working. That's all he would go for. So,
I guess that's my biggest problem right now, and one of the reasons I don't want to go visit doctors, and even the doctor that's going to help me do the DMSO um, uh, through the IV. I'm not so sure she's understanding exactly what I'm trying to do, because I think there are solutions out there for things, but we've got to start looking outside of the box. And the pharmaceutical industry, and I don't want to go down any rabbit holes or anything, but the pharmaceutical industry and the doctors and the way we're taught are all taught today. It's not in a way of let's go figure out what caused the problem and how to solve it. It's more of, well, let's treat the symptoms, and and let's get you feeling better or whatever, but we'll just get you on a regimen of medication, and we're just gonna keep you doing that, versus let's go find the problem, let's fix it, let's find a solution to this and help you overcome it. And that's, I think, um that to me is the hardest part, and in trying to convince the doctors that I see that this is actually working, that something is actually, I've been very um what's the word I'm looking for, very cautious in how I do this, in that um I'm trying to make sure that there's not a bunch of variables being introduced at once. And that's why next week I won't be using the DMSO topically the way I have been. We're going to go just to the IV DMSO, and we're going to see what happens. I'm very cautious about anything that I'm taking, whether it's even just some Advil or your ibuprofen or Tylenol or whatever. I'm very cautious about anything that could affect whatever I'm doing, and and I'm keeping track of those things. But right now, the bottom line is I'm doing absolutely nothing except the DMSO, and the DMSO is the only thing that's changed, or that I'm using, the change in my environment and in what I'm taking and using and putting on or whatever. That's the only thing that's changed. So I can really go back and say, hey, I know for sure that it's the DMSO that's helping me. There's nothing else involved. I don't take any of the ALS medications. I don't do any of that stuff. And I'm on no medications whatsoever at this time, except using the DMSO.
that's awesome. That is awesome. I'm like edge of my seat waiting to see how it goes after Monday.
Yeah,
You're gonna
I
turn into
am too.
Superman or something.
No, I'm hoping it has. I mean, the effects so far have been so good. I'm hoping that using it through the IV is even better. My hope, and like I said, one of my theories, and I'm not a doctor. I'm just an ALS patient, and a guy that likes to solve problems. Um, but my thinking is that it has to have it could have something to do with my spine, and I'm just wondering that if I get the DMSO into my bloodstream in a better way, that it can decrease inflammation in my spine, which that inflammation, if I have inflammation in my spinal fluid, into my spine, that those issues are going directly into my brain, which ALS is a neurological issue in the brain. So how do we, uh, fix that? And I've actually talked to now a couple of doctors about potentially, after seeing how the DMSO works through the IV, if we don't get the results we're looking for, because I'm not looking for results that just stabilize me or hold me where I'm at. I'm looking for, how do I completely solve the problem of ALS? And so, um, if if the DMSO in the through IV isn't getting me to where we want to go, then the next option, is, what if, um, we were to put the DMSO directly into the spinal fluid? So, because for the end of my career in the military, due to my back issues and with flying, I had to get spinal injections. I had so much spine issue from pulling, from flying high G aircraft for so many years, that for the last 3 years of my career, to keep me flying, I did injections in my spine, to help with the pain. And so I was thinking, well, hey, if we could do that, through the live X-ray, and you put the injection right into the spinal fluid. Well, what if we did that with DMSO? What if the, and I talked to one of the doctors about that, and they're like, well, that's pretty much like, putting an injection of DMSO directly into your brain, because whatever you put in that spinal fluid is gonna go directly to the brain. And I'm like, exactly. So what if what if there's something in my body that's not getting into the brain, some nutrient, some hormone, some supplement, some whatever, some vitamin, who knows what it is. What if it's no longer getting into the brain, and that's causing the brain to have the neurological issues? What if it's the inflammation? And so what if we put the DMSO directly in to the spine? I believe there are studies out there right now that they're looking at DMSO for spinal injuries and using it in spinal injuries. They're looking at what it could do. And so I think, there are possibilities out there that we just need to think about. And the hard part, what I'm finding, and talking to doctors about this, and some of the nurses and different things, people don't want to take the risk. They don't want to. Um, they don't want somebody to get hurt. They don't want to get sued. They don't want. They don't want. It's all about, protect this, protect that. Don't become vulnerable to this or that. And I think we've got to look past that. There are people, I think, like me, that are out there willing to try things to allow us to find answers. But there's so much regulation, and even the doctors talk, well, that they've said, the FDA is never going to approve you to do some of these things, because there's too much risk, or there's this or there's that. But I sit here and I go, well, but how are we going to find the answers if we aren't willing to take some of those risks? I mean, I look at it this way. I've already got a terminal illness. I've had a wonderful life. I've done amazing things. Uh, I've seen things. I've done things. I've got an amazing family. Um, I've just got, had a, like I said, a wonderful life. And but there's so much more, and there's so many other people that potentially we could help. And so that's my goal, and that's what I want to see done, is figure this out. In President Trump's first term, he signed a bill that was the right to try. People with terminal illnesses could try, uh, medications, therapies, whatever, that were still in the test phase, that were not approved, um, because they're terminal. And so I sit here and I kind of go, well, that's where I'm at. So let's figure this out, and let's find a solution, and let's help other people have a better quality of life, and enjoy this life, because there is so much to enjoy. anyway, that's kind of where we're at
Uh,
though.
Monday, I guess I'll text you Tuesday, how's that?
Yeah,
So I
we'll see
wanna
how it's
know.
going. Yeah,
Okay,
we'll see how it's
alright,
going.
yeah, yeah.
But
And then maybe we can touch base again, like, in January after you've done those weeks of DMSO IV and see how progress is going. Does that sound okay?
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see how that's all going, and yeah, I mean, I'm hoping. I think right now, the point is, we need to figure out if it helps. Um, if one time a week is enough, if one time a month is enough, if two times a week, three times a week, we need to figure, and that's where I'm trying to go. The problem is it's expensive. Um, they don't take insurance.
Right.
Um, and so it's all out of pocket, and that's fine. I'm happy to pay it. But I am talking to some nurses here where I live, um, to see if they'd be willing to hook me up to an IV solution, and then we put the DMSO in and go from there. And the thing that I'm looking at is, since there are doctors in the United States already doing this. They're at wellness clinics. They're not at traditional doctors'
Right.
offices, hospitals. They're these wellness, feel
Mhm.
better clinics. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
And so,
yes.
um, uh, it's not your standard medicine. And so, but what I'm finding is, in order for a nurse to be able to give me an IV, there's got to be a doctor's order. And so, um, whether or not the doctor at this location would authorize a nurse where I live, I probably, or write me a prescription, or I don't know. So, or will, and I did talk to the nurse here at the local VA, that I've been working with, and she said that the only issue is the doctor. If something happens to me, my medical stuff gets put before four other doctors plus my doctor, and they look at it and go, well, did the doctor do the right thing for you? Would they have done the same thing? And there's a little board, and you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
fight you get into, is nobody wants to be responsible for somebody getting hurt, injured, losing their life, whatever. But I guess I look at it and I go, I'm willing to sign whatever waiver you want me to sign, whatever
yeah,
release you want me to sign. I said, and that's why I went back to there's that right to try that's been approved. So if doctors are already authorizing, some other doctors are authorizing an IV DMSO, then why can't you authorize it? As
right.
my primary care doctor, why can't you just authorize that?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
um, if we can figure that out, like I said, if I don't have to drive, hours, uh, to go do this, and then, because it'll take a day, to go do this every time I want to do it. And so if I got to do it two or three times a week, that's the hard part. And
yeah.
so, and then we need to figure out, and if it does work, how can other people do it? And how do you get, like, that pulmonologist, or like the neurologist I saw and the pulmonologist I saw, that were like, yeah, DMSO, I don't know anything about it. That's not that
Yeah,
ain't that I'm not, you know, how do you get the other doctors to come on board and start thinking outside the box, versus thinking like they've been taught to think via all the
pharmaceutical,
training and the pharmaceuticals are teaching them. And you
yeah,
know it was
yeah,
funny,
I agree. Yeah,
when I spoke to the pulmonologist that I saw back in May. One of the things I talked to him about was that, I think in nature, a lot of our answers are in nature. They don't have to be in some made up pharmaceutical drug. And, DMSO is a natural byproduct, right? It comes I believe, from the production of paper. So, um, and it's natural occurring. So, and I talked to him about when I was a kid, um, I lived overseas. And my dad, was a civil engineer, and he was working on an oil rig. Um, he was building an oil rig to go out into the North Sea. And so we were living overseas, and where we lived, we were actually living in Scotland at the time, and I'd go up in those hills all the time, and but I'd get stung with these stinging nettles. And one day I'd come home and I'd been stung pretty bad, and there was an old timer lived down the road from us, and he saw me and asked me what had happened, and I said I'd gotten stung by all these stinging nettles, and he said next time you get stung by the stinging nettles, look over near the patch of nettles, and you're going to find this plant with these big leaves. And he told me what it looked like, and showed me what to look for. And he said, take one of those leaves off that plant and rub it and get the juice of that leaf all over wherever you got stung, and it'll take the sting away. And I'm like, really? And sure enough, it worked like a champ. In fact, my dad was at the house where we were renting. They had a small garden out back, and it was just covered in weeds. And so we had been there a couple months, and my dad wanted to clean it all up. And so he and I were out weeding in this garden, and he grabbed what he thought was a weed, but it was a stinging nettle. And he grabbed it with both hands and pulled it out, and it stung his hands really bad. And I said, hey Dad, you see that plant over there? Go grab that leaf and put that, rub that juice all over your hands. And he said, I'm not going to do that. And I said, no, Dad, trust me, just trust me. And so anyway, I went and pulled a leaf off, and I gave it to him, and he used it. And he's like, holy cow, that took the sting away. And I'm like, yeah, that guy down the road told me all about this, and how it would do it. And anyway, I was telling the pulmonologist about that, and about different, I mean, the Amazon is full of that kind of stuff. And so anyway, it was, I was just trying to explain to him that I think, nature has a lot of answers that we might be able to find, and solutions through. And so anyway, that's kind of where I was trying to go with that. But yeah, hopefully this DMSO does something, and it works. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of natural stuff out there that it doesn't make money for big pharma, so it hasn't been looked at. And that's one of the reasons I get really excited about all of the research that a Midwestern doctor is doing.
My wife found it. She was just scrolling the internet, and started researching DMSO. And
Oh,
then
okay.
then we bought some books on it, and she bought some books off Amazon, and so we read some books on it. And then she found a document that a Midwestern doctor had put out there. I think it's a 23-page PDF that he has out there or something. I think is how she found out about him.
Okay.
And so we had read that, and that's kind of what, when people ask me about it, that's what I send them, is that 23-page PDF online that talks about DMSO, and I share that with people. So
Yeah. Okay. Because I knew that's how we connected
uh-huh.
was through a Midwestern doctor. Anyway, I'm really excited about the various things that a Midwestern doctor has been looking into. Like the DMSO stuff has gone on for a couple years. And he's kind of ready to wrap it up because he wants to move on to other things, but then he keeps finding another way that DMSO is helping people, so he keeps doing more research on it. So I don't know. It'll be fun to see what else we find out about DMSO and a lot of other natural
Right.
uh, products out there.
Yeah. So I've not shared with him that I'm starting the IB. I've only talked to him, or him or her, that once on, on my wife's account, and that's the only time we've ever spoken. And so yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
and the doctor doesn't know hardly any of the stuff that I've shared with you today. So but
Well,
or about the test that I did on myself. So
yeah, yeah. I think this is going to be some really interesting information for him or her. I don't know which one it is. I don't, and I chat back and forth with that person pretty often, and I still
yeah.
don't know, which is for their safety. I am all about that.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I'll be honest, in doing this, I talked to a couple of my friends, and I said, should I do this interview online? Should I put myself, because I have zero online presence, other than shopping, on Amazon or something, I have no social media accounts. I have nothing. And I've tried to keep it that way, but they're like, yeah, if it's going to help other people, you might want to do it. And I'm like, well, that's the only reason we're doing this, is we want to figure out how to help,
Yeah.
other people with this, and see if this will really help them, or if it's just
Yeah.
me. Is it just, it can't just be me. So
No. No, I don't think it is. Just like
yeah,
my next door neighbor, Dan, with his COPD, we thought, well, we'll experiment and see what happens. And it turns out a whole lot of other people have started doing it and being able to alleviate the symptoms and possibly reverse their COPD.
yeah,
So,
which is
I mean,
huge.
I know what I see with I keep pointing next door. Nobody can see that, but next door is Dan.
Yeah,
Everything I see that's happening with Dan is just, uh, it's almost shocking to see the change that it's made for him.
yeah. And I think
So,
that's so wonderful. I mean, to
yeah,
know that there's something out there that people can use. I mean, isn't that what modern technology is all about? Is helping our quality of life to improve and do
yeah,
better. I mean, that's what it's supposed to be there. But sometimes, like you understand the pharmaceutical and the doctor's world. It just doesn't seem like everybody's on board with that.
right.
So,
Yeah, like policies and procedures got in the way of actual common sense.
you know, there's a lot of that in the world.
Yeah, yeah, there is.
There's a great
There is.
deal. So,
Oh. Well, Todd, I have kept you for an hour now, and I love visiting with you, and you have so many wonderful stories. I'm not gonna force you to just tell stories all day, though.
yeah, that's okay. No,
Oh,
but yeah, well, we'll be in touch after I do start this treatment on
okay.
Monday.
All
Okay.
right. I look forward
Hey,
to it.
thanks.